All right, ladies and gentlemen. So we have a very, very interesting conversation lined up ahead. How to build resilient capital in a volatile world. And volatility is the only constant in this world. In an era where tariff headlines come at such a furious pace that sometimes it's even difficult for us in the news business to keep pace with the change of things, geopolitical changes, and then, of course, the volatility in the market itself and the tech disruption that is forcing business to reimagine and redefine the way they are operating. So in all of this, how should companies, entrepreneurs, capital and investors, how do they build resilience in their models? That's what we're going to focus on. And I have with me experts from their respective domains. Of course, Vishal Mahadevia needs no introduction. He would definitely know something about capital, a thing or two, considering he's got, I think, $10 billion at last count, which is invested in India. And then we have the McKinsey view coming in from Joydeep. And then, of course, the REIT story, which is unfolding at a rapid pace in India. We're going to discuss that with Amit. So, let me open with you, Vishal. Is life more dramatic and hectic over the last 6 or 8 months, or do you still manage to find peace and take peaceful decisions when it comes to capital allocation?
So firstly, thank you for having me join this terrific panel. I just want to just step back and say how inspiring it is to have heard the stories, to see Dr. Reddy, to hear our Chief Minister, Amitabh Kant, Shaktikant Das. How can you not be excited to invest more capital into Maharashtra and India just after hearing that? Yeah, to answer your question, look, the last 6 to 8 months...
I think that deserves a round of applause, guys. Yeah.
Look, I would say, forget the last 6 to 8 months. I feel the last 6 to 8 years has been hectic. And the hectic nature of what's happening geopolitically around the globe, that's just been happening. If you go back and look pre-COVID, post-COVID, we referenced the crisis here for NBFCs. There's always something or the other. But patient capital has always been interested in India. And I actually see that today, the amount of investors, private equity, private capital, that is looking for opportunity in India, I've never seen it as much as it is today.
That's good to hear. There's also a lot of that patient private equity that's made some very sweet returns and it's exiting. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. But, Joydeep, from your lens, when we talk about these times, and there's disruption in every sphere, right? Capital flows, markets, business decisions, tariffs. What is your definition of, resilience and maybe the first step towards building it?
So thank you for that. And the two things I would say that really struck me over the last couple of years. First is, I think if you look at what companies are dealing with, and I think the range of disruptions are immense. First is at the macro level, right? So it's enormous, just the macro changes, the geopolitical moves that are happening. Second, the technological disruptions that you alluded to and we heard from our last panel. And finally, I think just in terms of talent, right? People are, the revolution of talent, the change in that mix which is happening. So one of the things which I think we've seen successful companies now really focus on is much more around what does it take to be resilient, and adaptability as a leadership trait is becoming something which people are increasingly focusing on. How do you move nimbly? How can you be more agile in the face of this? As opposed to thinking long-term in terms of drawing a big roadmap, it's much more about building a strong ship that can navigate when the waves are rough.
Interesting. So agility is no longer a choice. It is the new normal that you have to be.
It is,
you have to
indeed.
build and be with.
Indeed.
Okay. Your thoughts, opening thoughts on it.
In terms of resilience, for us as a REIT product, look what the pandemic has done for us, right? We went through a Black Swan event and, we consistently delivered, right? And we've delivered, growth plus yields, right? Which is really hard. And in a space where, globally office markets was a bad word, Indian REITs have actually delivered. And I think testament to the fact is now new capital as well as old capital is returning back. If you just see the diversity of the cap table that we have about 40% of FPIs in our book. And we have about 350 global fund houses. And there can be hedge funds versus, long funds, indexes, sovereign wealth management funds. So, you see the gamut of it. So I think, the story for us is just very strong. And I think we're just at the beginning of this event because it's a very new product in the country. It's about, 2019 was the first REIT that got listed. And, look what's happening. The space is now about 176 million square feet. The AUM is about 225,000 crores, market capitalization of 125,000 crores. And look where the US is, right? So I think it's a great story for us.
Since we're on the subject of REITs, let me actually, ask you a little more on that. I think, like we discussed in the previous panel as well on real estate, that the total assets under REITs in India is still a small sum by that stretch, right? Only about 20 billion. Now, as real estate, which is a capital guzzling sector, as it looks for options, how will REITs compete with the other traditional sources of capital, which are also available to at least grade A developers?
See, the REIT is actually a product that's been launched for the masses. It's an annuity product, right? So if you just take a comparison of US, what's done in the US is 98% of commercial real estate is in the REITs, right? And it's, the penetration on the market cap in the stock exchange is about 4%. In the Indian side, it's about 18% or 19% of the total commercial real estate is listed in the country. And see, we are in the verge of crossing the billion square feet mark in the country. And we're going to be the fourth largest. And I think about 35-40% of that stock is actually REITable as we speak today. But, 19% is where we are. And I think, just from that, for the next 5 years, the growth story is so imperative simply because there's an organic side of the story, which is the existing supply that's there, plus there's about 50 million square feet that gets added year on year. So that's the inorganic side of the growth story. And I think, this 25 billion will graduate to about 50 billion in the next 4-5 years.
Okay. Interesting perspective there on REITs. Now, Vishal, I want to come back to deals and capital, because whatever's been happening in the secondary market, it might be a flat year, et cetera, there has not been a day when we've not had a deal headline in the Indian market, right? And both inbound and outbound. What have you made of the absolutely hectic activity here? And what's private equity thinking when it comes to either taking a call on mature investments and, of course, taking a call on new potential investments here?
Look, I think as I started out by saying, as you look at private equity around the world, and let's pick Warburg Pincus as somebody, the question for us is, how can we do more in India? We're always pushing ourselves for how we can do more. And I think that asset class, private equity as a source of financing, has really matured in India. Entrepreneurs today are not asking the question, why should I take private equity? They're asking the question of, how can I take private equity to help grow my company, build a bigger business? And I'd say the virtuous cycle has actually closed because we're investors. We invest behind strong entrepreneurs and terrific management teams. And I'd mentioned this before. Really terrific management teams today are entrepreneurial. They want to leave their jobs and say, let us start something. Let us do something entrepreneurial with private equity backing. And without that, we can't find deals to do.
Is there, on that, because this was an offline conversation I was having with a deal maker here in India, and there was this debate about whether the animal spirits in India are dimming to an extent. I mean, I go back to reference that Mr. Uday Kotak made, a couple of quarters back, saying that now people are more interested in, selling stakes and running family offices than running businesses, because, that could be a little troublesome in terms of finding the right, deals and...
I see zero reduction in the animal spirits of entrepreneurs. If you're asking about animal spirits in the stock market, I'm not the one to comment on that. But entrepreneurs in India are as aggressive, as excited about the future. And frankly, as a private investor here in India, I couldn't be more excited right now about the next 10 years of investing in the country. So there is no dearth of entrepreneurs, no dearth of investors. So I actually quite excited.
That's again reassuring. Let me ask you about how you're thinking, just to stretch that point, in terms of the activity. Of course, you guys made huge headlines yourself with the IDFC First, right? So clearly financial services you're looking at. But there have been a couple of exits as well, again from financial services companies, and there are still apparently some in the offing. So where is your core focus now in the near to medium term in terms of opportunities here?
So we've always invested in a few core sectors which we're good at. We're thesis-based, and like I said, it starts with the entrepreneur. Financial services. I think technology in India, which is frankly part of financial services. Why are we excited in IDFC First Bank? We're excited because of the technology. Vaidya is building a technology-first bank. I know he spent a lot of money building the technology, but I promise you, it is differentiated. That's what excited us. It's not just a traditional banking business, right? So that disruption, that ability to do something differentiated is important. We see the Indian consumer. Yeah, everyone says, oh, there's a slowdown in consumption. We don't care about next quarter and next 6 months and next 9 months. 5 years from now, you've got an Indian consumer that is aspiring. They want more. There's lots of opportunities to invest. So I can keep talking, but I'll give you one example of a company called Merrill.
In which you invested?
Yeah, we invested in it. It's in Vapi. It's the Bilakhya family. Now, before I invested, I'd never been to Vapi in my life. Okay? My fault. But I met them. This company out there I didn't even know existed. It's amazing. And in the last 3 years, the way they've grown, half their business is outside of India. They're doing deep, real medical technology. I'm talking about robots for surgery, automation. It's amazing to see what's coming out of India from an entrepreneurial standpoint.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. I'm going to come back on the point of technology in just a bit. But Joydeep, come in on this. This is really heartening to hear because, we track the public listed markets as our daily bread and butter. And there's always this question about, earnings are not picking up and, top line is not growing. It's only about margin expansion. But how are you seeing Indian corporates, whether it's mature companies or mid-sized or even startups, adapt to the new normal? Because clearly there's appetite from people who have capital. So what would your suggestion or recipe be to get that capital and to really get going with it?
So maybe I'll answer that in two parts. I think first is, any corporate needs tailwind, right? And the Indian economy has got tailwind behind it. It's got growth behind it. And I think when you look at it from a investor lens and you look at both private capital in particular, today when we just completed a survey of LPs around the world and we interviewed across markets. And so far allocation in an India fund, if you made in a regional fund to India has been about 20%. People are looking to up that to about 40%, which means there's much more confidence in India as an investable destination. I'll come back to a glass empty view a little bit later, but let me stay with the positive narrative on this, because people do see 3 or 4 things which really stand out. I think people love the positive economic story. People love the entrepreneurialism in the companies. I don't think they see the lack of animal spirit yet, right? And they do see the emergence of what people call professional entrepreneurs. It's a new term which many LPs are now beginning to use, which is to say that, look, you had entrepreneurs which were typically businesses which were grown from first-generation founders. Then you had the professionals, but now you have the professional entrepreneurs who really we want to bet behind. So that's a second element which is quite interesting. And in that context, your question on companies themselves, I think the companies are transforming. I think there is no company that we talk to which doesn't have transformation on the top of its agenda, right? Transformation in terms of the shift on technology is a big factor, right? Everybody is talking about digitization. There's nobody who doesn't talk of AI, whether they understand it or not. Everybody talks about it, at least, which is the first part. But there's a massive amount under the surface of reskilling and building up the capabilities that is going on, which I feel very confident about therefore the future of companies in India to adapt effectively to this change.
Now let's broaden this out to technology because it touches everyone and all of the businesses that you all either invest in or deal with, and of course the REITs. I mean, the tech story is so important for that. So Vishal, to come back, and we can break this up. There's traditional, of course, IT services here. There are a lot of the new age internet companies, and we had some of those fantastic disruptors with Mr. Kant on his panel just a while back. And then there is this whole GCC piece, right? So the argument is that you have all this, but you don't have real cutting-edge AI in India, and you don't have deep tech in India, and therefore South Korea is getting the money, or Japan's getting the money, etc. Maybe China is getting the money. So, Vishal, what do you say to that argument? And how should investors and Indian entrepreneurs look at technology to be, well, global ready? I mean, from both an investment perspective as well as a business perspective.
Look, it's the biggest challenge. I've been saying it for a while. It's the biggest challenge India faces, not just India. I would say, look, as you look at AI, countries that have a large young population, and you think about the next couple of decades, how they harness AI. And that's why some of this near-term disruption, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, tariffs, global wars, but when we look back 5 or 10 years from today at India and we say, did we succeed or not? It will be, could we harness that power of technology well? Could we actually go to a nation of innovation from just services? So those are challenges that are real. They're happening. By the way, investors completely believe it. We're investing around the world. Are we starting maybe a bit late? But it's still very early in the game. So I look at India and I look at AI, I look at deep tech, I look at innovation. I think it's all just starting out here. I'm optimistic about it, but it is a challenge. And it's top of mind of not only the entrepreneurs, but all of us as investors as well. As how do we play that?
And in the meantime, of course, we have our homegrown internet/platform companies. Many have already come to the market. Many are making their way to the market. And that's the hottest debate here. Valuations, have they reached the maturity, the size and scale? Are they leaving enough on the table? You're seeing this from a global Asian vantage point. What do you say?
No, look, I think valuation is always the question. But I think if you take a 5-year view, whether you pay, on some of these technology companies, whether you pay 10% more or less, frankly, it's not going to make it a success or not. We are investing, just pick data centers in India. It's an amazing business, and there's a long runway. The question is, how do you grow it fast? How do you execute it better? And we've just opened 2 data centers in Bombay. Right now, one of our portfolio companies, Princeton Digital Group. So as you look at AI, as you look at tech, as you look at the plumbing around it, I just see lots of opportunities. Valuation is not the constraint. Opportunities, entrepreneurial spirit, that really is.
Joydeep, what do you have to say on the great India tech debate?
No, look, firstly, I agree with the point made. But I do worry about one thing. And that is if you take a 5-year view and you look at the investment trends, it looks great. But if you take a 15-year view and then you take a look at all of the geopolitical moves that are happening, under the surface, in the last 3 years, dramatic changes have happened. So let me give you 3 examples. Number one, I think the US, which was essentially a net investor, is effectively now the biggest investee in the world, right? 50 to 60% of total greenfield investment is going into the US. Advanced Asian countries, which used to invest together with the US and Europe into emerging markets, are now investing in the US. So if you look at South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, they're all investing in the US, right? You look at data center, and where are they investing? It's all in the new technologies, EV, renewables, data centers, of course, the whole fab area, right? Semiconductors. So if you take a 15-year view and you say that, look, these are the industries which effectively over a period of time are going to shape GDP, shape revenues, bring the next billion-dollar companies or the trillion-dollar companies, I worry that India doesn't get its fair share, right? In fact, I think India risks not having that kind of capital coming in because that is what will really build the foundation for the ecosystem around it to happen. So that's the piece I worry about. I'm not worried about the near term or the medium term. I worry about the long term.
Okay. That's an interesting point. Amit, on the issue of technology, and we were asking some of our other panelists on this as well. In an era where you don't know how US policy shapes up and whether that kind of slows down to an extent the GCC and offshoring drive, in an era where Indian companies are being forced to reimagine, so you don't know if workforce sizes start reducing a little bit, where does that leave the look ahead for REITs and the promise of 15 to 16% IRR?
So, we've been doing a lot of conversations with our occupiers, right? So what I'm hearing is that India has the largest pool of data science, right, talent, the second largest pool of AI talent in the country, and the largest English-speaking AI talent, right? Now, if I just bring that to the GCC story, at the end of 2024, we had about 1,900 GCCs employing about 1.9 million workforce. And that's expected to grow to about, 2,000 plus 2,200, 2,400 GCCs employing about 2.4 million workforce. Now, one interesting fact is about 6,000 of the global jobs, the CTO jobs, are being performed from India. And that's expected to grow to about 30,000 jobs, right? India is now not seen as, a cost arbitrage country, but it's been seen as the innovation hub, transformation hub, where deep tech is actually being done. But, what we worry about is that there's a lot of jobs and a lot of work, a lot of technology being done, but we are not harnessing it as a country. Yeah. It's the large corporations which are harnessing that. And that's what's worrying us. You see the internet bubble or the internet era or the, the ITS era. All the companies were the US-led companies or they were Japanese companies, but, we didn't benefit despite the fact that the technology was getting built in our country.
I have one quick last question. I think we're running out of time, but Amit, this one's for you, the final word, because it's the biggest debate here in India, right? We've spoken about a lot of inbound investment and private equity interest in India. There are also big exits. Temasek going out of Schneider, that was a large, I think, $6 billion transaction, Carlyle with PNB Housing, and so on and so forth. So many examples last 12 months. So that always raises the debate that does the smart money know something? Is this market at prime valuation now? Or is it just a sign of maturity? Which side of that debate are you on?
Oh, it's completely a sign of maturity. You cannot get fresh FDI into the country unless you have successful exits. And every dollar that is exited, I promise you multiples of that will come back. I will sit with you on a panel years from today and we will look back, and that's a promise.
And which also then brings me to the whole debate around FDI itself, because FY25, gross FDI is about $80 billion. Net was almost flat. So again, it raises that issue of, what's really happening with net FDI.
You invite me back to your panel 3 years from today, we will have this conversation. There will be more FDI that you will see because of the exits.
More private equity investment, more FDI, resilient is the word from what we've heard on this panel. Thank you so much, all of you, for giving your insights. Thank you very much.